Today, the high-rise horror show continues. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Those of you following the channel will know that we've been highlighting all of the questions around high-rise construction across Australia for a long time. Of course, governments have really as good as ignored the problem of defects in multi-unit residential construction, even though they've been aware of it for many years. Now, this is particularly concerning because the state governments in New South Wales and Victoria have been busy spruiking this type of accommodation as the solution to the pressure of rising populations in Sydney and Melbourne. And given this, the protections for apartment owners under existing legislation are ludicrously slight. Unfortunately, compliance with the National Construction Code, the NCC, in its current form is, well, frankly, no guarantee. There are so many ambiguities and grey areas in the NCC and in the way that it's being applied that it's a guarantee almost nothing at all, particularly when it comes to waterproofing. A simple example is the construction of balconies with flat slabs, which is perfectly acceptable under the NCC. The floor slab is constructed as a single pane from the interior to the exterior of the building, with the waterproof barrier at the balcony being provided by a masonry wall or a concrete ridge on top of the slab. This design almost always leaks within a few years. The reliable solution is to cast the slab with a step, but this is more expensive and as a consequence is rare. Cut price membranes under tiled terraces are also common, causing leaks, mould and misery, despite arguably complying with the provisions of the NCC. And of course, we can then talk about more significant structural issues as well as flammable cladding. But to reinforce the state of the high-rise construction issues, there was an article by the ABC this week headed "Fair Trading Inspectors Find Structural Issues at Major City Apartment Development." They said, one of Sydney's biggest residential property developments is under review amid the discovery of structural issues that will require specialist engineering advice. Top Place Group's Skyview apartment complex in Castle Hill will consist of around 960 luxurious 1, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, many of which have already been sold off the plan. One source suggests this site, by the way, had been previously owned by a state government, which did a geotech survey that discovered stability issues and then promptly sold it off to an overseas developer, which begs the question, who knew what, when about the site, and were the right steps taken through the process? But what we do know, says the ABC, is that a team of inspectors from New South Wales Fair Trading has reported finding the existence of structural issues that require specialist engineering advice, as the company seeks occupation certificates for 2 of its 5 towers. While 2 towers are almost ready, the 3rd and 4th are under construction and the 5th is yet to be built. Top Place has refuted the concerns, saying it has absolute faith in its work and private structural engineers have cleared the building. The fresh inspection by Fair Trading comes after ABC News and several MPs received images of the development's basement during construction earlier this year from an industry whistleblower asking for an investigation into uneven concrete. Top Place subsequently allowed ABC News to tour the basement, where remediation work appeared to include metal plates bolted across concrete joints. ABC News has spoken to several independent structural engineers who said the images sent by the whistleblower warranted a review. Director of SCP Engineers and Development Consultants Paul Seibert said the photos appeared to indicate failure of the slab connection, resulting in slab settlement and loss of support, something which would require remediation work. Whilst the cause might be either design or construction related or both, the result is significant remedial work that would need to be undertaken to restore the structural integrity and fire rating compliance. the development is currently under review by its third private certifier, City Plan Services, which was appointed in March after its first certifier was deregistered and its second resigned. Upon appointment, City Plan Services informed the New South Wales Building Commissioner that it had concerns about previous certification work, but had reached an understanding with the developer that the previous work would be thoroughly reviewed. City Plan Services issued the company with a written direction notice requiring the appointment of an independent engineer to undertake a review of the building, which is now underway. Details of the fresh inspection by fair trading officers were outlined by New South Wales Minister of Better Regulation, Kevin Anderson, in a letter to Green MP David Shoebridge, one of the politicians who referred the matter to the Building Commissioner after receiving information from the whistleblower. Following the receipt of your letter, even though there was already action being taken at the development arising from the certifier performing his function, Fair Trading sent a team of authorised officers to the site on the 16th of April 2021, Minister Anderson wrote. This inspection confirmed the existence of structural issues that would require specialist engineering advice and that the certifier was appropriately handling the matter. The Office of New South Wales Building Commissioner David Chandler said it was aware of allegations of defects but had full faith in the certifier's review. The Office of the Building Commissioner is aware that there have been allegations of serious defects existing at the Skyview building that is still under construction, said a spokeswoman. Occupation certificate inspectors from the department have inspected the relevant work and identified that the matter is being managed appropriately by a private certifier. The Buildings Commissioner's Office is then expected to undertake its own independent audit of the experts' reports. According to New South Wales law, new developments must be given an occupation certificate as the final step in a construction process before residents are allowed to move into a completed part of the building. The review comes amid growing public concern over the standards of construction work in New South Wales after high-profile buildings had to be evacuated in Sydney over the past 3 years. In 2018, hundreds of residents were forced to evacuate the Opal Tower at Olympic Park after cracks started to appear in the building's concrete beams. And in 2019, Mascot Tower in Sydney's south were evacuated amid fears one of the buildings could collapse. Residents have been unable to return to their homes since, and many of the 132 apartment owners have been left financially destitute. Greens MP David Shoebridge says the public deserve to be informed of the progress of the review into the Skyview development. I'm glad to see that it's on the Building Commissioner's radar, he said. We've raised it with him directly and the government because we are so concerned. New South Wales Labor spokeswoman for building reform, Yasmin Catley, also requested a review after receiving the same information. The Building Commissioner needs to get involved. He needs to utilise everything that is at his fingertips, she said. After raising concerns to Top Place, a team of construction managers from the company provided ABC News with a tour of the basement, showcasing recent remediation work. It includes a series of metal plates bolted between concrete slabs in the shared basement beneath the towers. A Top Place spokesperson completely rejected allegations of structural problems and said aside from aesthetic defects, the building had no other issues. We have opened the building completely to inspection by the ABC, they said. The building has been subject to unfounded and malicious allegations. The building has been found to be entirely sound and built to a high standard. They said one engineering firm sourced by Top Place had previously given its own tick of approval over the remediation work, while another company provided a peer review. Remediation works began at that time with design solutions, continued inspections and monitoring occurred, and first physical works occurred mid-2020. Remediation work occurred from January 2020 and were completed before the 22nd of February 2021. Sign-off has been provided by the relevant authorised consultants contractors for all elements of the site without issue. On that basis, there are no issues across the site. Top Place said the photos sent to MPs depicted expansion joints designed into the building to permit the slabs to move as the concrete expands and contracts. So we'll see how that progresses. But More broadly, we're getting private reports from our viewers of other high-rise buildings with structural and flammable cladding issues. The bottom line is that the risks are high, undeclared and rising, and that this will at very least raise strata fees for remediation, at worst lead to loss of capital like at Mascot Towers. No one wants to admit to the scale of the problem across the country, not just the state. We have reports from Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, the Gold Coast, Canberra, Darwin, Adelaide and Perth, and the story is very, very similar. Poor quality construction and design, bodged remediation, and a risk of capital loss. More broadly, a system allowing defective apartment buildings not only creates huge financial and emotional stress for residents, but much wider economic and social risks. Poor building practices undermine confidence in the multi-billion-dollar construction industry, the strata management industry, and in the planning system. They also contribute to inequality. This is because apartment residents are often likely to be younger, renting, on lower incomes, and from non-English speaking backgrounds. And amid growing concerns about the widening gaps between the housing haves and the have-nots, there is renewed political interest in housing policy. Certainly, this is a crucial issue for governments to tackle, but it goes beyond a focus on housing supply and prices. Addressing quality must also be a priority. At the same time, we also need to step back and consider how we do compact city planning more broadly, and including the roles that government and the private market play. With 2/3 of us now calling our biggest cities home, we need to have a serious public conversation about what we want our cities to be and how we can best achieve those goals. We can't afford to ignore the growing evidence that our cities are cracking under the strain, because like the Opal Tower, Mascot Tower and elsewhere, we're going to bear the cost when things go wrong, and we'll all have to live amid the wreckage. There is absolutely need for more transparency here, perhaps a central publicly accessible register of defective buildings and firms who built them, and greater disclosure from strata managers. But meantime, folks, if you are considering buying high-rise, be very, very careful. And interestingly, I note a rise in the number of people looking to sell and get out of these defective buildings as they look for a greater fool to buy them. And as Edwin and I discussed recently, if you are considering purchasing a high-rise, look in the common areas and basements, not just in the superficially glossy apartment. And if you must buy off the plan, then check the credentials and track record of the builders. Strata title allows each resident to own the space in which they live, as well as a share of the common property, including pipes and walls. It's the way apartments are usually sold after they've been developed. The market for residential building is extremely competitive, and controlling the cost of construction is one of the key factors in making a profit. Sometimes the urge to maximize profit dominates to the extent that both short and long-term construction failures are inevitable. Remember that developers owe buyers few legal obligations once the apartments are sold, which limits their risks if they get things wrong, and many, of course, just disappear anyway after they've finished construction. There are also significant market pressures, particularly in boom times, to build quickly and cheaply, and there are gaps in how the construction processes are overseen, which means that errors go unnoticed. Now, these are not new observations, but getting regulations in place to address them is proving challenging. A case in point is New South Wales' new defects bond, which requires developers to put aside 2% of the building's values to fix defects down the track. The bond's introduction was delayed for years, and it will be a few more years yet before we know if it fully works. There are, of course, reputable developers and builders, but reputation usually finishes last, undercut by less reputable players who produce buildings that are slightly cheaper. Defects in single-storey speculative houses with pitched roofs are probably just as common as defects in multi-unit dwellings with flat roofs, but they are much easier to fix because the houses are close to the ground and no strata committee is involved. They're also much easier to find. A competent building inspection initiated by a purchaser is normally enough to protect the buyer. On the other hand, a building inspection of a single unit in a multi-unit development is highly unlikely to find defects which are located elsewhere in the common property of a building. The only practical way to make multi-unit developments a good investment for the residents and a decent place to live is for governments to take a proactive role in driving quality through the design and construction process, not just at the end when the building is certified for occupation or at the beginning when it gets a development approval. It is a simple reality that no other actor in the construction process has the capacity to take this role, and it's also simpler and cheaper to build in quality than to rectify defects. If the building performs well, it will have a longer life and it will reduce the need to eventually replace it with a new building, again saving materials and improving the outcome for embodied carbon. And it's worth remembering that 20 million tonnes of construction and demolition wastes are produced in Australia each and every year. So I come back to this point that whatever the story is about that single case that we mentioned earlier, this is a structural issue across Australia, and things need to change substantially to address it. Meddling around the edge or just passing the buck to another certifier won't solve the problem. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.